Is it possible the QATARI jet gift is in exchange for something far more sinister than we realize? Will all of these deals that the felon is making with these Arab nations like Syria, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, will they spark extremist groups in Israel to rise up and possibly plot some assassination attempts against the felon? And why did the Supreme Court decide to hear the birthright citizenship case? Welcome to Scrying Out Loud. My name is Trevor. First off, a huge thank you to everybody who's subscribed to the channel, to everybody who likes, watches, shares, comments on the videos. I try to respond to all your comments, or at least indicate that I've read them. I don't always get to all of them, but I try. But that's in part because of a huge thank you to everybody that's promoted the channel. The channel's really grown beyond my expectations. So huge, huge thank you. If you've given money through the Buy Me Coffee, Venmo, Super Thanks, it's very much appreciated. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you want to book a private reading with me, I still have some times available. You can see a post in the community posts. You can find my email also in the channel description, as long as you're not on a mobile device. Or you can find me on Blue Sky at Scrying Out Loud. Excuse me. So it's at Scrying Out Loud. And that link's also in the channel description on Blue Sky. So you can also respond to the comment I have on Blue Sky. I'll get in touch with you one way or another. Okay. So why is the Supreme Court hearing this birthright citizenship case? It's pretty clearly written in the Constitution that, people born in the US are going to be considered citizens. This was in response, of course, to the end of the Civil War in the 14th Amendment. So is the Supreme Court going to say that the literal text of the document doesn't mean what it means? I don't think so. So let's just first pull just a few cards. Is the Supreme Court going to reject this executive order and rule that being born in the US makes you a citizen? Will they just rule that being born in the US makes you a citizen? Just a few cards. I think the answer is yes. That's why I'm not wanting to pull a whole bunch of cards on this. I've always felt the answer was yes. You can go back to a reading I did on this in, I don't know, January, whenever the executive order was signed. I said, oh, it's so ridiculous. We probably don't even need to read on it. Yeah, they're going to just immediately reject it. It means exactly what it's supposed to mean. That's the message. The message is about freedom. And it's about security with the Ace of Pentacles, all yes cards. And all the fighting is just what it is. It's just fighting. And it means nothing. So why did they take up the case? I think that's the more interesting question. I don't really have any doubts that they're going to rule against his executive order because it would create a lot of chaos. I think Justice Barrett in particular learned her lesson after going along with the Dobbs decision, which I think she regrets. That, there are consequences and chaos that can be inflicted by undoing decades of precedent, or in this case, I guess it's about 170, no, maybe not quite that long, 160 some years worth of precedent. So why are they hearing this case? Why are they hearing this case? They want to make sure that the guardrails stay in place. They don't want any other lower courts ruling on it before they do, other than the one that already said it's not enforceable. They didn't want any intermediary steps. That's why they decided to take it. They want to be firm in their decision that this is absolutely against the rule of law, and they want to play that role. In the environment around, we get the government. And I think they want to point out to the executive branch that they are an equal co-branch of government, and that attacks on the judiciary are not welcome, and they're going to have consequences. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is a fiery opinion in which it just completely destroys the executive branch's idea of trumping over, not pun not intended there, of trying to just undo parts of the Constitution because they feel like it. I think it's going to be a very spirited ruling. They also want to send messages to foreign adversaries that he alone is not in charge. I think that's why the Russia card is coming up. Again, it's about freedom and sending a message to everybody so that they can all take a deep breath and relax. I know a lot of people in the Native American community were very nervous about this because they really weren't quite sure what it means if your parents, your grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, however far back you go, weren't citizens. Does that mean you're not a citizen, even though generations have been born in the US? It would create so much chaos. And I think they want to make that very clear that the writing of the Constitution means what it says, not what you want it to mean. They want to do it to create stability. They also want to do it to try to regain a little bit of credibility. I think Justice Roberts in particular knows that the Supreme Court has lost a lot of credibility, and he would like to get it back. I don't think it will. I think he'll be looked upon as one of the worst Chief Justices for a long time. But then again, we don't have a lot of good Chief Justices in our history. There's always some horrible decision that happens underneath them that we look at. It's to bring moderation back to the branches underneath them. So the appellate courts underneath them, to let them know, don't make these crazy decisions that are blatantly against the rule of law. Just because you feel like it, we're going to overrule you. We're here to keep things in place and to keep the guardrails happening. There are some things we don't know that are going on behind the scenes. This might have been a bargaining with the liberals. I feel like one of the liberals is going to write this opinion, or at least write a concurring opinion that's going to be super fiery and just make no mistake, completely, for lack of a better word, trash the executive branch for doing what they've done. Here's the felon appearing in the reading. He's in the environment around, and he's not the be all say all. And that's the kind of the point that they're going to send. They're going to send also this message that you do have security here. This will also go along with other decisions such as, US citizens can't be sent out of the country against their will. I think we're going to get a bunch of positive decisions from the Supreme Court. It's a question of whether they'll actually enforce them. I'm hopeful that they will. So guardrails being put in place to tell people that the court has legitimacy and that your freedoms are fundamentally intact and you have security. Things that we quite don't understand behind the scenes having to do with the justices themselves, trying to bring legitimacy back to the court and saying to other countries that the felon is not the one in charge, that is not how the United States works. And that's why in the environment around, we have the government, we have moderation, we have freedom, and we have the felon. And all of these work in unison. Unfortunately, the felon has a lot of power, but he certainly doesn't have all the power. And I think that's what this is going to be about. Yeah, underneath we get the end of a cycle. This is kind of the end of them letting things slide without being really excruciatingly blatant about how unconstitutional these things are. And they have the circles of support that they need, the Three of Pentacles, to bring about stability for families, and also stability for the next generation, the Six of Cups. So I think that's why they're taking up the case. I don't think it's because six of them or five of them have doubts about whether this executive order is constitutional. I think, they probably already know the way they're going to rule on this one. But I think in some ways, this is just about bringing legitimacy back to the court and also saying to the executive branch, you know what, you're only one of three branches. Okay, so all of these deals with Syria, lifting sanctions off of Syria, right or wrong, I'm not making a judgment call on that. Cozying up to Saudi Arabia, super cozying up to Qatar, been pretty friendly with the UAE as well. The only really Arab state that we've been kind of tense with is Lebanon. So is this going to create some backlash inside of, I don't know what the proper term is. I'll just call them Israeli extremists. Is there like this underground of Israeli extremists that now feel that the felon has flipped on Israel? I don't think he has. I'm just saying, I just wonder if he's not going to start to get trashed in that type of media sphere. Because, of course, these groups operate on, our way or the highway type beliefs, as do most extremist groups. And for a while, the felon was on their way. And now this feels like a veering off, although who really knows what the felon's thinking? Because I think at this point, his cognitive decline is so serious that we have to question everything. But are there going to be plots against him? Or I feel like it's just going to be against him. They're going to be plots against him. Yeah, assassination plots. I don't believe any of them will be successful, but we'll look at that if the cards kind of indicate we need to. Let's just ask, is that part of the extremist groups in the world going to try to take him out? It's kind of like they lost their best friend, is how it felt when I was scrying. It's like a look in disbelief. And then the plane from Qatar kind of sealed the deal for them, as in, like, okay, this isn't just, him being friendly. This is him going to side with them because he's taking bribes. Assassination plots. Queen of Cups. So a lot of emotional energy going on in the leadership of these groups. The fiery messages in the environment around. It's like they really heard this thing going on in Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the Syria. They heard this message, and they think it's very fiery, and they feel like it's an affront to them. We get the hanged man pausing and suspending. We'll have to go a little bit further before we know what the upper right card means. Get the three of swords and the environment around betrayal. They feel very betrayed. They're very angry. They're not at all uh, on his side anymore. Like this was a step too far, although, might not have seemed like a huge step to some people. To these groups, it seemed like a step way too far. It's like they were counting on him to really do what he was going to say or what he had said about Gaza, like taking over Gaza. They were really counting on like establishing a bigger, stronger, bolder Israel. And now they're questioning whether he's really supports that. And the truth is, I don't think he ever supported it to begin with. I don't think he knows really what he supports. I think he just says whatever's going to make the person around him happy. I think we've reached that stage of dementia. There are things going on behind the scenes that we can't see in the environment behind or in the environment around. I think there is plotting in the environment around. There are a lot of heavy burdens to be lifted if they are going to come up with some sort of plan. So the 10 of Wands, lots of heavy things need to be lifted. It feels like they're heading in that direction, though. The Six of Swords, they're heading away from him. And there's a lot to juggle, and there's some overseas influence as well. Clearly, this isn't a state-sponsored situation. These are just extremist groups inside of Israel. So there's a lot of emotions. They're running very high. They were very hopeful. And in some ways, I think they were hopeful there wouldn't be a two-state solution. I don't know why the Two of Pentacles is coming to me that way, but they were hopeful that Israel would, maybe reclaim some territory from Palestine. I don't think that ever was going to happen. They feel very burdened now because their dreams sort of have been dashed, and now they're rethinking how to approach this. The message was heard loud and clear with these, removing sanctions from Syria, deals with Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They feel very betrayed. They feel like they're moving on without him. And there are things going on behind the scenes that we don't know about that very well could be quite dark. Underneath, if one plan works, or one plan doesn't work, try another. Walking away from things that don't serve us, in this case, walking away from the felon. Deceit, deception. They feel tricked. They feel robbed. We get a spy in the camp also, which if there was one card for an assassin, this would be the card, the Page of Swords. I don't know. I think we'll have to see how the media plays out in these spheres. Of course, we don't watch that set of media, but I think there might be reporting on it if it starts to go a little bit against him, because it's been pretty positive for him. At least that's my understanding from what I've read online. So I think it could get pretty dark. Okay, so what about this QATARI jet? Okay, so I've scryed on this for several days, and I hadn't really got anything other than that the jet's going to get seized right after he's no longer president. That I feel is going to happen. But why? Uh, the Qatari leader was on television saying, "Why would we need to bribe him? What's the what's the quid pro quo, so to speak? What's the motivation? Can't this just be a gift? Why does it have to be something darker than that?" And it is true that there have been billion-dollar deals done, and $400 million is less than that. And theoretically, it could be a gift. I don't think so, though. It doesn't sound right to me. Doesn't set right to me. I mean, that's a big gift. And why a jet? And then all of a sudden there's a deal announced with Boeing today. It just something's not quite right with this. So why is this going on? So when I was scrying, I just kept getting pulled to these images that appeared, I don't know if it was a 60 Minutes piece or um, Dateline or some sort of news organizational piece. I think it was about the United Arab Emirates, but it's very similar. Um, of immigrants going to the United Arab Emirates or Qatar, and they need a person to sponsor their immigration. This is the way it works in Qatar now. It's called the uh, Khalifa law or something like that, um, where you have to have a sponsorship. And oftentimes the immigrants get really exploited because they take their passports so that they can't leave the country. They pay them in cash so they can't dispute whether they were paid correctly or not. And they basically become like indentured servants. And Qatar, in particular, ranks really low on the human rights um, list of, basically engaging in things akin to slavery, not quite to that level. It's not quite the way it's worded, but this indentured servitude, controlling people's movements in and out of the country, not allowing them out once they're in. Uh, Most of the immigrants come from India or South Asia. Those are the ones that are usually treated the worst. If you're of European or North African descent, you tend to be treated a little bit better. Um, so is this jet a way of the US not talking about what's going on actually in Qatar? And is it somehow maybe even more sinister? So, um, there are extreme laws in the United Arab Emirates and in Qatar. There are that deal with sex, sexuality, all of these things. However, I mean, Dubai, which is in the United Arab Emirates, is one of the big sex trafficking capitals of the world, right? It that's one of their big things. Um, the government, I don't think, condones it, but I don't think they necessarily go out looking to arrest people either. I think the same thing goes on in Doha, the capital of Qatar. So let's just look at that. Is this jet kind of a way of um, having the US ignore these things, or possibly even worse? Does this have something to do with trafficking, like keeping indentured servants, keeping this quiet, keeping it out of the news? I mean, it's hard to find the articles, but the Biden administration really did speak about this, at several points about how these practices were unacceptable. We haven't heard anything from the current administration about any human rights violations because we're the ones violating human rights right now, we being the US. Do we need to know? What do we need to know about this deal? is this connected to in trafficking, enslaving people, indentured servitude? Is it somehow connected to this idea? The Eight of Swords in the water, which is about confinement. It's definitely a victory for Cutter. It's a victory for their reputation by keeping these things quiet. Now, the truth is most people probably aren't aware of them anyhow, but there are some that are. I mean, Dubai is not Qatar. That's Doha. Doha's in Qatar. Doha's not generally a huge tourist destination, but it's not a small tourist destination either. People do go there. It's quite hot in the summer, but the same true with Dubai. But they have these huge, you know, buildings where you never need to even leave the building, right? And Dubai, for example, they have the huge resort where there's a ski resort inside of the hotel. Um, yeah. Okay, so I think it does have to do with um, children through adulthood. The Six of Cups. It's two sixes, by the way. Bombshells and surprises. It's worse than we think. It's not something as simple as a bribe. I think it's way worse. You get the Two of Pentacles, juggling things, overseas influence, trying to keep people from talking about what's actually going on behind the scenes. And they're doing that with bribes, such as this jet. I wouldn't be surprised if there are other bribes to other countries, in particular India and some of the Southeast Asian countries like Sri Lanka and Thailand as well. Yeah, something very sneaky and deceitful about this. The Seven of Swords. It's definitely not above board. That's for sure. It feels very wrong, and it feels way darker than anybody's reporting. Yeah, things coming to the surface. The moon card and the environment around. Yeah, fiery messages being thrown. Maybe trying to stop them. Stop messages being discussed about Cutter, defending oneself in the environment around the Seven of Wands, and dark energy, Elon Musk type energy in the lower right. So it's a victory for Cutter to cover up their um, unacceptable behaviors, which are quite dark. And I think that's what it's about. I think it's a way of trying to get the UN, the US still has UN veto power. All of these things are kind of on the table and what it's about. So it's keeping messages about their darker side, so to speak, quiet because they would be too shocking. And for some reason, they feel like this is going to get exposed. I think this might be tied to, I think we might find that there are some people in the royal family that might be on the Epstein list, for example. We have thinking about the next generation, overseas money and influence to defend themselves. What are they defending against? They're defending against something coming to the surface or something to be known about. So I think that's precisely what it's about. keeping people in poverty. This is people live in extraordinarily horrible conditions when they're in these when they immigrate over there and their passports are taken and they're not paid a livable wage. I think in the UAE, the documentary or I don't know if it's 60 Minutes or Dateline, one of those, there's a report on it. And, there are like 12 people living in a one bedroom apartment or one room apartment, just using like a gas cooking stove. They didn't even have electricity. It's a new beginning for them that avoids uh, people realizing the heartache that they're causing and the the dark cycle that they're perpetuating, which eventually will come to an end as we sort of move forward with humanity, but probably not anytime soon. So, is it possible that these kidnappings in the United States, these the young children at the border that aren't allowed lawyers, the kidnapped Ukrainian children um, that we don't know where they are. Is this somehow all connected to this thing? I'm not saying they're all in Qatar. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying I think it's all kind of a global, like the really rich are the ones exploiting this situation for their own sort of depravity. Is this all sort of connected? Again, for entertainment purposes only, I could be wrong. It doesn't feel wrong. It feels like that's been going on over there forever, and it's maybe getting harder to keep quiet. Is there a relationship between these missing children in Qatar and this jet? They feel connected. Afraid so. Here's the card for Russia, the Empress card. That's where the Ukrainian children supposedly went. But who knows after they're there where they go? I mean, there's so many borders that can be crossed to get to to Qatar that we wouldn't know about it, right? You can go through all the former Soviet states and Iran and Saudi Arabia, and then all of a sudden you're at Qatar, right? Yeah, abuse of power, the emperor, the president abusing his power in the environment around. Yeah, the puppeteer. Somebody's pulling the strings, making this happen. And by somebody, I think it's a group of people. I don't think it's one person. Yeah, the Five of Swords, uh, being wounded in battle, taking advantage of, I think, wounds in battles. So taking advantage of people who are in unfortunate situations due to really no fault of their own, such as the Ukrainian children, the kids at the border without lawyers, the people being basically taken off the streets in the US without due process. The Seven of Wands is at the center of the reading, defending oneself. The Hanged Man again, pausing in suspension, reassessing the situation, taking advantage of it. The Devil card, mis and disinformation, abuse of power, toxicity. Basically, as dark as you think it could be, I think it's darker. I think that's true for almost everything the felon does. Everything that he's thinking is actually more ill-intended. Although he's coming to a point where he's incapable of having, his cognitive functions are starting to deteriorate. We get the Four of Wands. It's about people and families being torn apart and the environment around, and unlikely partnerships. The Lover's card. This is an unlikely situation. This wouldn't have thought to, we wouldn't have think the US cozying up to Russia, for example, but that's what's going on. That position's being defended, but now there's more unlikely partnerships. In particular, some of these deals in the Arab states seem a little bit premature. Then we got the devil card, the toxicity around that, the abuse of power around that. It's being defended, and it's being defended to the benefit of the puppeteers who are controlling things, sort of this global elite. And so president's abusing his power. Now, in some ways, I don't think he gets a choice. I think he's very much wrapped up in all of this, and it'll be exposed if he doesn't. And we get the Five of Swords being wounded in battle. Who's being wounded? Families are being wounded. And we get the Hanged Man pausing in suspension, lives put on hold, lives being ruined. It's, I think, much darker than we realize. Circles of support around money, things behind the scenes that we can't see, spy in the camp. So are they related? I'm not 100% sure, but it sure feels like that's the idea, is to cover up these human rights abuses, to try to add some legitimacy to Qatar, and uh, the US UN veto power, I think, has got something to do with it, because usually there's some human rights condemnations that come around every year for certain countries, and the US will veto it, and this is probably why. So I think the jet is, it's worse than what we think. So anyhow, all right. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with another video soon.